about water and urban places. This is Ideanthro. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro, where today we have a guest with us and we're talking about something that is really quite close to my heart. And you might have picked this up as a theme on Ideanthro before, and that is the benefit and the opportunities and the learning that we can get by going to different places, going to places that we're not from, whether that's overseas, whether that's different parts of the country, whether that's even just a different local government area and chatting with people to see what's going on in stormwater in that world, water sensitive cities in that world, and then bringing it back. Now my guest today is Simon Roberts from E2 Design Lab. And we have Simon on because he recently went to Copenhagen for, I suppose, a learning experience over there. And so I couldn't resist having a chat to touch base and to see what that was about. So Simon, welcome along.
Thanks, Jack.
Why don't you take a second and tell us a little bit about who you are and then tell us about this trip.
All right, so I'm based in Melbourne. I work with E2 Design Lab as a civil engineer. And we do a lot of work in the integrated water management, water sensitive urban design, water sensitive city space, all those hit words there.
Yep.
And I guess I'm really passionate about water, but also around city design and what we can do to make our cities a better place to live, but also more environmentally friendly.
Cool. Okay, so this trip, I've said it's Copenhagen, but I've given no other setup for this. Tell us what the trip was.
So it was called the Copenhagen Urban Lab, and essentially the International Water Association, the young professionals part of that organization, put out a call for 6 young professionals from all around the world to come together and focus on an urban design challenge in Copenhagen. So I threw my name in the ring, and essentially they wanted 2 people in the landscape architect field, 2 in urban planning, and 2 in what they defined as just water expertise. So I guess I fell into that category. And I was lucky enough to get picked. So packed my bags and flew off to Copenhagen.
So what, this is for a week, is it?
It was a 9-day program, and it involved, essentially the kickoff was a day and a half of presentations of all the different stakeholders were involved in putting together the program, but also with the challenge, the real world challenge that we were trying to tackle. So we had people from the municipality of Copenhagen, HO4, which is kind of like a combined utility of energy and water. Rambol, who hosted us, and they presented kind of a lot of the work they'd done in coming up with the strategy. So basically PowerPoint Central for 24 hours.
Yep.
Bit of a crash course, and the next day we headed out for a site tour of the lake complex in Copenhagen that we were focusing on. So
what was the challenge that you were dealing with?
The challenge was how do you use green technology or water sensitive urban design along with landscape design to deal with serious flood events. So Copenhagen had a huge flood in 2011 that led to over $1 billion in insurance claims. So essentially the premise was that if they could spend $1 billion avoiding that they'd be cost neutral, and hopefully they could spend less than $1 billion avoiding that kind of flooding.
Yep, gotcha. And why was green infrastructure the focus? Why not, build a bunch of big pipes?
So they essentially had a strategy document that looked at 2 core options, and one was the traditional let's build a pipe kind of solution, and the other one was still obviously relying predominantly on pipes, but it was talking about trying to use what we call water sensitive urban design in the catchment to delay the storm event and infiltrate some of the storm water into the catchment. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but the green infrastructure approach won out on the economics.
Okay.
And it's not surprising when I think the difference in the peak pipe diameter was something like 3 meters. Like the pipe only option was looking at pipes, I use that term loosely, of 9 meters in diameter. So we're talking tunnels, not pipes.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So it's imperative.
Okay. So I like this. I'm really fascinated by this this thing that's happening in Europe, where these cities that have been around for a lot longer than Australian cities and have all this existing embedded infrastructure, but now are looking at water sensitive urban design as an approach to mitigate climate change and to mitigate flooding, because like we tend to in Australia focus more on the water quality aspect. So I'm fascinated with this. So you went over there, you had this experience. What did you get out of the experience?
I guess it was a bit of an epiphany of like why soft skills matter.
Okay.
I mean, I've always been someone who believed in the value of soft skills. It's not just about your technical expertise, but when you're thrown in a pressure cooker with 5 other people from around the world, all speak different native tongues, all don't work in the area, all have different expertise. I mean, that's not what you would call a normal work situation, but I guess it's a real pressure cooker to test your mettle as to how you work with others and also how you manage your own composure and feelings throughout that process.
Gotcha. And were there some challenges along those lines?
Definitely. So, I mean, the organizer was fantastic and provided us with a heap of resources, but there was still, I guess, some uncertainty. And like, you've been flown over there and people have invested in you and you want to deliver. They're not expecting you to solve this flooding challenge in 5 days.
Sure.
But that was a lot of like personal pressure you put on yourself.
Yep.
And then the team dynamics. I mean, you're getting to know these people on a personal level at the same time trying to deliver a project. And because you're you're on equal footing, there's no designated leader. So you've kind of got to be careful of how you work through that process. That was really tough.
Gotcha. It strikes me when you mentioned how this is like, obviously there's a big challenge here and you've got to deal with it, but it's also different to work environment. It struck me that there's a little bit of an analogy, I think, to sport in the sense that to a certain degree, like everyday work is a little bit like training for a sporting event, and this is almost akin to like if a sports person then goes and maybe competes at the World Championships for the first time. It's such a big step outside their comfort zone. It's just a massive learning experience. It strikes me as a bit of a parallel there. It's not a clear lineup, but for me, with a bit of a sporting background, that kind of makes sense. So, okay, so you've learnt these, or you've got this opportunity to really focus on and use these soft skills. Were there other things that you got from the trip in particular?
I'd say that was the biggest part, but the other part was an appreciation for water management in a different cultural setting and physical setting, and as you flagged before, the focus on flooding and why they had that focus, but also why they'd managed to get this quite impressive and innovative strategy up. And I mean, Copenhagen is a leader in biking, but it's also a leader in a whole lot of other sustainability initiatives. So it was interesting to see or try and get a little starter as to why that has worked there.
Yep. So so you managed to learn a little bit about the space while you were there. And this is of interest to me because 6 months ago I went to the Netherlands, ostensibly to teach a little bit, but then stayed on a little longer just to try and learn and to see stuff. And I was able to pick up certain aspects of what was going on, getting a taste for what's happening in the Netherlands, but I also feel like there was a bunch of stuff that I missed there or just didn't have the chance to get into detail. What aspects of the challenge allowed you to get a feel for the space? Like, were there particular things that they did that you were like, wow, that was golden, because they did that, I got XYZ out of it?
I guess there's 2 things. One is you could probably pick it up just by reading the kind of background information to why this flood strategy originated.
Mm-hmm.
And so to give you, in short, is that the City of Copenhagen developed a climate adaptation strategy. I think it was back in 2010, so they were kind of ahead of the field in that anyway. But then in 2011, this freak storm, you could call it, they call them cloudbursts, a really serious flood event, hit the city and created this $1 billion of damage. And that was kind of ostensibly proof of climate change in a lot of people's minds, or at least gave it a lot of like imperative of, okay, well, even if it's not happening, we've got these major storms we should be more prepared for.
Yep.
And because they had this strategy sitting there ready to go, that created, it mean they could just straight away start working on the stormwater management plan. They had like all the runs on the board to make it a really quick transition into creating the strategy that supported green infrastructure, and there was a business case around it. So what that taught me was that, you know, it's easy to look overseas and go, oh, they're doing so well on this, but it's not just because of one thing. It's there's all these things come together, and one of the things that made this happen is just the fact that a storm hit. Just as in Australia, you know, if there's a flood, there's a lot of funding goes to flooding. If there's a drought, a lot goes to drought.
Yeah,
it's the same things everywhere. So you kind of just need to be happy to sit back and when your chance comes, be ready to run with it. But do rely on some things, external factors.
Yeah. How did they convey? Because there's a bit of context and history and story there. How did they convey that to you? Like, what was it that allowed you to learn that?
That was essentially the first presentation, I think, or first or second presentation on day one. A head lady in the city of Copenhagen gave us the background and said, "This is why it happened. This is why we were able to make this happen, and these were the drivers." So, I mean, the second learning was something that was about being in the room and just observing people. And what I noticed that I think is kind of different to our Australian mindset is the Danish willingness just to go into a problem and come up with a solution and decide that solution is the right way and start walking down that path without actually being confident or 100% sure of their ability to deliver it.
Okay.
So there was a lot of technical challenges to implement this strategy. It was proven to be more economically viable. But in terms of technical ability to deliver it, it hadn't all been ironed out.
Okay, and right. And you think, and to you, that feels different to Australia. Do you feel that we are much more likely to be like, look, if we're not confident we can do it, we're not going to try? Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't want to say that, but it was more like if someone in the room was saying, oh, how are we going to do that? Or maybe me or someone in the group was asking, oh, how is that going to work? It wouldn't be, I think in Australia, it would be quite a serious answer or response. And if you didn't know the answer, it'd be like, we don't know it, but we're doing this, this, and this to keep a very professional front on it. Whereas they were very open of saying, that's going to be really difficult. We don't know how we're going to do that, but we'll do it. We'll figure it out. Okay. And that figure it out is saying that inherent in that is them saying, maybe we can't do it, but obviously we'll just find a workaround, which is what you do all the time. So I thought that was really refreshing, that just the atmosphere of approaching the same problem.
I like that honesty and that almost transparency to it.
It makes it safe to fail, I guess, or to acknowledge that you're experimenting and we don't have all the answers or all the science.
I was just going to say, it makes me think that it would be a better environment for learning from failures as well, because it would seem that there wouldn't be as much pressure to, show that front of, we've got it, or to push it aside. There's a really interesting book that goes into that topic called Black Box Thinking. I think the author's Matthew Syed. And it's all about how the airline industry's really good at admitting its failures, investigating and learning from them, because it's really honest about them, and how other industries aren't as open and honest about that. Anyway, that's a sidetrack. So those are several things that you got out of this. Is there anything that you went over there, or even in hindsight, maybe didn't go over there, but just reflecting, looking back, anything that you wish you'd been able to learn from that trip but didn't? Because I've got one from my Netherlands experience, but I'll let you go first before I preempt that.
I guess I would have liked to progress, not technically per se, but like, I guess some like really interesting key new knowledge or something like that. And I definitely learned a whole lot of things, but I guess they're more around that history side and that culture and soft skills. And so in hindsight, I think that was enough. But I guess going into it, I was kind of expecting to get some, more like typical university content for a comparison. And also I was hoping, I guess, that the team would come together really well and present a really well thought through, coherent strategy. And I think we certainly did it justice to the challenge, but I guess I didn't feel we hit that 10% where it's just like everything's merging together and it's just hitting everything that you want to hit. So
Yeah. If you ran a similar challenge in Australia for 6 international water professionals, what would you do differently to try and give them a bit more of that experience?
Well, first off, I've got to give full credit to the organising committee and all the sponsors who are involved, because they did an absolutely fantastic job. It would be hard to beat what they did. So I'd really like to thank them and acknowledge how good it was.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not digging into this from a point of view of
No, of course,
it's
it's just a good opportunity to say it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, I think one thing, particularly when you've got 6 total strangers and none of them can be the group leader, because that wouldn't be appropriate. It's really important for that project manager to be checking in and providing very structured guidance, I guess, every day when it's only a 9-day program or something like that. So we certainly had a bit of that, but I guess the objectives of our challenge and what we were expected to deliver in that time frame under the constraints wasn't that clear until the end, and it was already happening.
Yeah, gotcha. So for me, I'd be interested to see what your reflections on this is. For me, my trip to the Netherlands, I found it really easy to go and see things that were happening on the ground, and I could pick up, like, learn some interesting stuff from that. Had this epiphany of sorts for me, which was essentially, hey, look, because I saw this stuff that's essentially, it's not by the same names, but I saw permeable paving and bioretention systems and swales and all this stuff that's the technologies of water-sensitive urban design. But what I saw in the Netherlands was them implementing it for flood management purposes, and the water quality was a tack on the side, versus in Australia, it's more a case of we're doing it for water quality benefits and the flood management's a tack on the side. And so I was able to have that epiphany, but what I didn't get the chance to dig into was more of like, it just almost be what you'd call the soft skills, or like the background knowledge of what allows that to be the case. Like, I mean, I get the history, that I couldn't get the background of like, why do their policies and their planning send them in this direction? I could see easily the end products on the ground, but less of the how and the why things were the way they were. Does that experience hold true for you, or do you feel you got some of that?
I know what you're talking about, and I didn't get a great understanding of why, but I guess it's like anything where there's obviously some core people and also some core knowledge in the industry that is kind of like the Bible. And so if you challenge that, it's not that you won't be heard, but that I guess there's a status quo in place. And so that's everyone's reference point. So that probably sounds a bit abstract, but I mean, I did mention some water quality things because that's a big focus here in our design. Yep. And it was interesting because it was in the brief that water quality needed to be addressed after flooding in the dot point list, but it was there.
Yep.
And then we got to a certain level of assessing that and trying to do something about it, and then they just didn't really want us to deal with it anymore. For them, it was like, oh, we've ticked that box. It's kind of like the minor element.
Yeah.
And so when I probed around that, I guess I got the impression that, one, they're just very skilled and used to working in the flooding space, and two, they actually didn't have as much research to back up the water quality things, things that I was talking about. So I think it's probably because it builds on itself, so the people work in flooding, and then the research is on flooding, and then, so I don't know why it started out that way, but I guess the water quality side of things is lagging behind partly because the people and the knowledge also is working in that space.
Maybe this is a question we can leave for people in the comments, which is, have they when traveling to different places, have they had success at times of, I suppose, getting a feel for the more intangible aspects of why the place operates the way it does, wherever that might be, even if that's just going interstate? Have people had success in trips of getting a feel for those intangibles? And if they have, how did they do that? What happened on that trip? Let's pose that as a question for people. So this has been fascinating for me. We could talk all day, but we did promise off camera before we started that we try and keep this succinct, and I think we failed on our timeline. So let's go with one last question. Where would you go next? Where else in the world fascinates you to go and learn from?
I'd love to go to South America.
Why do you say that?
Never been there, and I know that there is some research going on in Chile, where some contemporaries from when I studied at Monash University in the water sensitive urban design space are working. So I'd love to see someone who's been exposed to Australia but isn't Australian, and that kind of thinking has then gone over and applied that in a different country that may not have the same, setup of people and knowledge, and therefore is testing these concepts. I'd love to see how that's all working out.
Yeah, actually that strikes me. I met a student from the International Water Centre in Brisbane who was from Chile, and yeah, he was telling me some interesting context about their water situation. That's a chat for another day. Cool. Simon, thank you for taking the time to chat. Is there anything that you feel that we should close off on? Anything else? Anything that we've skipped that absolutely should be in this episode?
I'd just like to point out that it was kind of fate that I saw the application, and luck that I got. Got to have your name in the ring to be chosen. I feel very lucky, and I really encourage everyone else to just, if you see an opportunity like that, you should go for it, because it's really exciting and fun. It's a great trip.
Yeah, and that rings true with my Netherlands trip. The fact that I decided to stay a week was really like a almost on a whim sort of, oh yeah, let's just do it. And yeah, it was worth it for sure. Okay, cool. Thank you for taking the time to have a chat. Actually, where can people find you if they want to know more about this, want you to point them in the right direction?
You can email me at E2DesignLab, or you can catch me on LinkedIn. And also, I'd like to say I'm the co-founder of Our Future Cities, which is a student design competition and seminar series in Melbourne. So cool. If you're interested in this kind of thing, I really strongly recommend you getting onto the Our Future Cities website.org and registering, and we can have a chat.
There you go. Check it out. Okay, Simon, thank you for the chat, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks a lot, Jack. Cheers.
See ya.
Before you go, our best episodes come from your questions. This knowledge base, these discussions that are Ideanthro, improve with your contribution. So if there's a topic, an idea, a concept that you would like us to explore, come and ask us. You know where to find us. www.ideanthro.com/contact. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and that place you get your good podcasts from. You know where to find us. We look forward to hearing from you. We'll see you soon.